America. My name is Osei-Frimpong, and we're going to talk a little bit about Mamdani's affordability politics and how it has hard limits. It is better than cultural issues that are indifferent to the affordability, the inability to afford daycare and housing and healthcare. However, it does not substitute for a robust responsibility politics that doesn't just articulate individual responsibility, which is kind of this nebulous thing, but actually talks about institutional responsibilities, including the institution of the family, or the institution of, civil society and your job in civil society, or the institution of your political responsibility. For example, one reason that the left is going to have to confront the uglier aspects of the right, and I mean like the Nick Fuentes right, and not just kind of dodge it, is because when Fuentes says something like, these liberals don't care about family, they don't care about religion, they don't care about God, that might be a problem because it's largely true. I say that again. When folks like Fuentes says that these liberals are bad on family, religion, and God, that might be a problem for Democrats because it's broadly true. The answer is to just get better on these issues. The answer is to just get better. And to get better on this, you need to talk about non-governmental responsibilities. What the government shouldn't do. Can do, but shouldn't do. Right? Because without that, you'll always open up yourself to charges that they want the government to take over non-government responsibilities. They want the government to raise your kids. They want the government to pay you money instead of you actually earning it on the job. They want the government to do, to vote for you instead of actually participating in debates and voting for yourself and actually doing the work of politics. And you want to be free to have someone else raise your kids while you go to, this is the caricature of the liberal. They want, you want to be free to have someone else raise your kid, give you money while you go to brunch. And you don't even have to worry about politics. That's going to be the caricature. The liberal who wants other people to raise their kids, other people to work so that they can earn money and consume, and other people to govern so that they can just go to brunch, right? So that is the reason why the left broadly and, Democrats also need to actually talk about non-governmental responsibilities. They need to be able to say, this is what government does. And this is what families do. Now, governments can help families do their job, but governments shouldn't determine what the family does because this is a family prerogative. This is not a family prerogative. This is an moral prerogative. This is between an individual and their sense of divine, which can be abstracted from all their relationships, and yet uphold those relationships. All right? But this isn't, the government can't force your religion. That's up to you, but it can enable you to have the religious experience that you deserve, abstracted from, and that's what you do on purpose, right? Your morality and your relation to things that are higher than this world and can't be touched. Like the you-ness of you, right? So government can free that, can allow for that, and can allow for that to be spoken about in community with other people with the same apprehension of the divine, right? But it can't actually determine what your divine should be. All right, so the government can actually help you secure property without actually making you live in a certain place, right? And telling you what to do with your property. Right? These are decisions and responsibilities you have as property owners, responsibilities you have as religious participants, responsibilities you have as family members that the government can enable, but without determining and without taking over. Right? Because if the government takes over those responsibilities, they render your life both meaningless and unfree, and that's a quality of communism that the right is going to charge. Right? So liberals will say these things don't matter, families don't matter, religions don't matter, borders don't matter. The right will actually, and especially the Nick Fuentes right, will actually articulate why they matter. They'll just articulate them mattering on the wrong axes. And then what you need is actually a Democrat or a leftist to go through that and articulate what the government does as distinct from what the family does, and articulate what the family does. Like, we can fight over what family does and what government does, but we can't conflate the two. We can't conflate. We have to understand that there are distinct family things. There are distinct family things that the government ought not intrude on the sovereignty and the judgment of, for example, parents. And until the left can actually talk about non-governmental responsibilities and how the government can actually uphold and enable non-government responsibilities without taking them over, then the affordability talk will always falter to the responsibility talk, because the responsibility talk gets a bad name because it's always about personal responsibility, but there are some forms of institutional responsibility that are necessary for freedom. For example, if I talk about families a lot, responsibility to participate in a union, right? To pick which union you determine, right? And not just have to be shunted to AFT under Randy Weingarten. Like, you should be able to pick which union represents you and then have a fair say. And nobody's going to make that decision for you. They should just enable you to make the decision for yourself. Which union you belong to and what that union means and what's the platform of, your concern about your working conditions and your wages and your benefits on the job, right? Government can't give you money, but it can be the employer of last resort. But you still have to work. You still have to work. I think it's important that the government steps in as the employer of last resort, just because I don't think it's healthy to separate meaningful activity from money, or money from meaningful activity. So I'm not a UBI guy. I actually think we need to just create the conditions so that people can productively contribute and specify their skills and get concrete skills, and then pass on concrete skills. The CCC and the WPA, I think, are great examples of work programs that actually build the nation, step in places that the market doesn't, and then we could pay people good wages to do this. So I do think that you can't be free unless you have an income. And in an advanced economy, that means we need to secure people good jobs, and the government can step in as the employer of last resort, not the paymaster of last resort, in terms of just like a UBI giving them money for no work. But we can put you meaningfully to work. We can put you meaningfully to work. And even in the world of AI and robotics, there is still meaningful work to be done. We could get these class sizes down to 2. If that's what it takes to make sure that all kids can read and participate in life. So the affordability liberals need to be able to talk about responsibility without reducing all responsibility to personal responsibility. They need to talk about non-governmental institutional responsibility. What can the church do that the government can't? And it needs to be able to articulate that. What can families do that the government shouldn't? What does a private media do that the government should and couldn't? We need to have those conversations, because without that, it looks like it's conflating all responsibilities and all forms of expression to the state, and is an abrogation of institutional forms of freedom that should be that are actually, I think, constitutive of individual freedom. Right. So until we can undermine the argument that liberals want to take care of your kids and they don't trust you to be families, until we can undermine the argument that liberals want to screw up your religion and don't actually trust you to be able to commune with God on your own, and with your determinations. Until we can undermine the argument that liberals want to just give you money as opposed to help you work, find work, meaningful work, and also organize on your job in a meaningful way. Until we can undermine the argument that liberals don't care about borders. And you need borders because borders allow you to be different than other people. And if you can't be particularly who you are, then you can't determine yourself, and that undermines self-determination, right? So borders allow us to be different from Mexico and Canada. We can decide who we want to be, and we're allowed to do that and allow them to decide who they want to be, and that allows a quality of sovereignty for everyone. So we should support states that enable self-determination. We should not support states that do not enable self-determination. For example, Israel does not enable self-determination, especially if you're a Palestinian. That seems very clear, right? So states are little hubs of equal rights, but they need to be distinct from other states in order to be particularly what they are, in order to decide for themselves what they are, right? By the way, if you appreciate what I'm talking about, you should go to www.funkyacademic.com, kick in $5, $15, $50 a month, because, here's the deal. Nick Fuentes is inevitable. The dirtbag right needs a dirtbag left. And I'm going to get a little bit more dirtbaggy as the months go on, because someone's going to have to talk about big woman. And when I say big woman, that's the equivalent of big pharma, the feminist industrial complex, which is telling you that fathers are irrelevant and that kids don't need parents, plural. And the plural is important because that way people have to listen to each other. People have to listen to each other. No, and that means like fathers should have the authority to tell, mothers that they're doing it wrong. And it should be a licensed authority. Now, that shouldn't be the end of the conversation. This is where conservatives get it wrong. But this idea that fathers are extraneous because you only really need mothers, and that happy wife, all of that, we pretend that this is kind of benign cliches, but it's actually culturally perfidious in a way that if it's not redressed by the left, if the left doesn't defend nuclear families, then families will be defended by the right in a way that's unsettling. And don't think the right is some sort of static entity. I just don't underestimate the influence Nick Fuentes is going to have on the culture in the coming decade. And there is no going around him, and there is no ignoring him. So I'm going to go through him, and I'm going to teach you how to go through him. And it's very important. It's very important because that's kind of what progress is going to look like. America is a center-right, vaguely racist nation, and he is that. And you have to go through that and not ignore it in order to progress through it. So I'm going to talk about why the government needs to step in as an employer of last resort. And I'm going to talk about why we need borders in order to decide what we are. We need families in order to raise children under a unified authority, and how there are all these market institutions that could help families do their job without actually doing the job of the family, which is kind of a quality of authority that the family needs to retain. And we need competent parents and competent spouses, and how it might be the state's job to ensure that parents and spouses have the culture to be competent when they're parents and spouses, as parents and spouses. So that might have to be young. It might have to be in public education. Look, if I actually were teaching home ec, there'd be fewer divorces, and there'd be fewer marriages of mercenaries where, guys are just using women for sex and women are just using guys for money. And the marriages would be held together by not just in a mutual affection and love, but also an awareness that the point of the marriage is to create a unified household where you guys work it out for each other. And when there are kids, for the kids. And that kids have a right to a unified household. And that means you can't just split up because you feel like it and say 50-50 custody solves that problem, because kids have a right to a unified household, which means parents have a duty to work it out. And until we get leftists who actually talk like this, the Fuentes right is going to win, because he'll actually say that. It'll be under some kind of draconian sensibility, where I'm just saying that as a matter of the kid's right to a unified household, so you don't enforce them into a life of schizophrenia, you need to marry someone who you're pledging to work it out with, because that's the pledge. That's the pledge. Right. So let me, I'll read super chats, but let me look at the chat real quick before I cut out. If there is no TAMF, there's no child support. American men should hope that welfare shutdown is permanent. So I think by the time we're talking about child support, we've lost the plot. Too many people are marrying too many people for the wrong reasons. Like, we raised a generation of mercenaries. Liberals just created like a generation of mercenary women, and